The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, but upon closer inspection, the medical examiner noted a comminuted skull fracture with multiple sharp fragments indicative of high-energy impact. The toxicological panel was not ordered on the initial examination. That decision was later reviewed after evidence emerged suggesting the presence of volatile substances that could have influenced the deceased's state at the time of the incident. This omission highlighted the importance of a comprehensive investigative approach in understanding the full scope of traumatic injuries. During the autopsy, radiographic imaging revealed extensive comminution across various regions of the skull, including the parietal and occipital bones. These findings necessitated reevaluation of the initial cause of death determination, emphasizing the need for thorough toxicological screening to rule out substance-induced impairment as a contributing factor in such cases. Chapter: Case background. The incident under examination occurred at a residential apartment complex in downtown Atlanta on the evening of March 15th, when a tenant reported an unusual noise coming from Unit 3B to building management. Upon initial inspection, neighbors noticed the front door of the unit had been forced open, and there was evidence of a scuffle inside. The deceased was found lying supine on the bedroom floor with visible injuries indicative of blunt force trauma. Responding emergency services assumed it to be an isolated incident of violence based on the immediate surroundings and the condition of the body. No signs of forced entry were detected elsewhere in the building, suggesting familiarity between the perpetrator and victim or a breach from within. The case was promptly escalated to law enforcement for further investigation. Chapter: Initial findings. Upon arrival at the scene, first responders noted a single individual lying supine on a concrete pavement. There were no immediate bystanders or witnesses present. The deceased exhibited extensive cranial trauma with visible scalp lacerations and pooling of blood around the head region. No other external injuries were observed. Given the severity of the apparent head injury, initial medical assessment was conducted using minimal contact due to potential for complicating any forensic evidence. Despite efforts to establish vital signs, responsiveness could not be confirmed. However, no discernible breathing or cardiac activity was detected. The immediate environment lacked clear indicators of a struggle beyond the presence of the deceased, and a nearby blunt object resembling a heavy cylindrical metallic implement. Based on these observations, the initial manner of death was classified as undetermined pending further forensic examination and autopsy to clarify mechanism and nature of trauma, leading to comminuted skull fracture patterns observed. Chapter: Forensic investigation. At the scene, a comminuted skull fracture, consistent with high-impact blunt force trauma, was observed on the posterior aspect of the skull. Multiple small bone fragments were found interspersed within a larger section of displaced cranial vault. The primary impact area exhibited extensive hemorrhaging and soft tissue damage. Forensic investigators collected bone fragments in sterile packaging, securing them for laboratory analysis. No foreign objects were present at the scene that could definitively be linked to the injury mechanism. A detailed photographic record was created, documenting fracture patterns and associated injuries. All evidence was meticulously logged with a strict chain of custody protocol maintained throughout the investigation process. Notable was the absence of defensive wounds on the extremities, suggesting an unexpected attack scenario. Computed tomography, CT, scans revealed multiple comminuted skull fractures with sharp, irregular fracture lines indicative of high-impact trauma. Microscopic analysis of bone fragments from the occipital region confirmed the presence of linear and stellate fractures, consistent with blunt force trauma. Histological examination of brain tissue adjacent to the fractures showed evidence of hemorrhagic necrosis and diffuse axonal injury. Quantitative polymerase chain reaction, qPCR, was employed to detect genetic markers for cellular stress response, revealing elevated expression levels of heat shock protein 70, HSB70, in affected tissues. Immunohistochemistry confirmed increased microglial activity around the fracture sites, indicative of neuroinflammatory response. Concentrations of lactate dehydrogenase, LDH, and creatine kinase, CK, were measured at 125 IU/L and 48 U/L respectively, indicating significant cellular damage and metabolic disruption. The comminuted skull fracture patterns observed in the deceased indicated multiple blunt force impacts over a short duration. Microscopic analysis of the bone fragments revealed varying degrees of fresh and partially healed fractures, suggesting at least two distinct impact events. The first set of injuries occurred approximately 24 to 72 hours prior to death, based on histological examination of fracture callus formation. This was corroborated by the presence of a small hematoma in the subdural space, indicative of an acute injury followed by a period of stabilization before fatal blows were delivered. The second set of injuries, consistent with the immediate cause of death, showed no signs of healing or remodeling, confirming their recent occurrence and proximity to time of death. Radiocarbon dating and entomological evidence further refined the postmortem interval to between 36 and 48 hours prior to body discovery. This timeline confirmed a sequential pattern of injury consistent with escalating violence over a 2-day period, contradicting initial reports suggesting a single incident as the cause of death. The comminuted skull fracture observed in this case is characterized by multiple fragments of bone displaced into the brain parenchyma. This type of injury typically results from a high-impact blunt force trauma, such as being struck with a heavy object or falling from a significant height. Radiographic imaging and macroscopic examination revealed the presence of linear fractures radiating outwards from the point of impact, indicative of the mechanism involved in the fatal incident. The pattern and distribution of these fractures provide critical evidence regarding the nature and force of the traumatic event. The forensic pathologist's expert opinion is that this comminuted fracture is a direct result of a single, severe blunt force trauma. This conclusion is based on the absence of any pre-existing conditions or prior injuries that could have contributed to the observed skull damage. The evidence supporting this finding is conclusive in its indication of the traumatic mechanism, but interpretive regarding specific causative objects due to the variability and complexity of such fractures. In court, the expert would confidently assert these findings while acknowledging limitations related to identifying a single instrument definitively. Chapter: Resolution upon comprehensive analysis of the deceased's cranial remains, a definitive determination of comminuted skull fracture patterns due to blunt force trauma was reached. Initial radiographic imaging suggested multiple linear fractures indicative of impact from a hard object. Subsequent microscopic examination confirmed extensive fragmentation and displacement of bone fragments, characteristic of a severe impact consistent with a heavy implement such as a hammer or crowbar. The central finding of comminuted skull fracture patterns was established through meticulous documentation of fragment size and distribution across the cranial vault. This pattern is indicative of significant force application over a small area, leading to widespread disruption of bone continuity. From initial assessment, which focused primarily on identifying the presence of linear fractures, the scope expanded to include detailed analysis of bone morphology and fracture displacement. This shift in focus was necessitated by the discovery of irregularly shaped fragments scattered throughout the skull, indicating more severe trauma than initially suspected. The final determination underscores the lethal nature of the inflicted blunt force trauma. This case underscores the critical role of meticulous documentation and analysis in identifying patterns indicative of comminuted skull fractures. Radiological imaging and forensic pathology collaboration provide essential evidence, guiding legal proceedings and informing public safety measures. The file remains open,